guys, it is Michelle, and I am here with my January 2015 reading wrap-up. It was a pretty good month. I finished 9 books, 1 novella, and 1 graphic novel. First up, I read Scarlet by Marissa Meyer because it's a retelling, and that fit one of the categories for the Read Harder 2015 challenge, and I wanted to get off to a solid start on that thing, so I'm not panicking in December trying to fit in a bunch of reading for that. It was a very fun continuation of the Lunar Chronicles series. I was thrilled to find out that Cinder's story continued because although it was very much like Cinderella, the ending I was like, well, that really wasn't like Cinderella. So it's awesome that her story is continuing. And of course, we started Scarlet's story, which is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. I have heard a lot of swooning over Wolf on BookTube, but I just really couldn't connect with him. I just really didn't trust him at all and his motives. But on the other hand, I loved Carswell Thorne. He was just the right style and amount of comic relief to the otherwise kind of heavy story that was going on. I did think one plot twist has been way overused in this series already, so I'm hoping that kind of slacks off in the future. But the dialogue was great, the banter was great, the pacing was great. I really enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars out of 5. Next, I read an advanced digital release copy that I got from Edelweiss, and this was Rebound by Noelle August. And this is a second book in a series of companion novels. It is a new adult series, so you do kind of need to be an adult to read the content that is in there. In the first story, you follow 2 people who were competing for the same job, and they had this young, rich, successful, good-looking boss. So this is his story, and it turns out the person that is his love interest in this book is Allison, and she was the hated ex-girlfriend of the main male protagonist in the first book. So I was like, okay, Veronica Rossi can make me love people, so maybe because she's part of this writing duo, she can make me love Allison even though I hate her. And sure enough, she did. They pulled it off. This book had the same great banter in it, the same just hilariously awkward situations. You're just laughing so hard throughout it. But everyone is, again, young, successful, handsome, rich, no real problems to be found here, but it's just so fun to read. Even someone who just craves realism as much as me is like, who cares? It's just too fun. So looking forward to whatever comes next in that series. Gave it 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. Next, I read a poetry collection. This was also a part of the Read Harder Challenge, and I chose From Where I Stand by Robert Zimmerman because I find his writing style to be pretty straightforward. I'm not having to guess what he says. He's pretty good about communicating, at least in a way I can understand exactly what he is trying to say. I did find this kind of like therapy for him, like he's working his way through things that have happened in his past by writing these, and I was just amazed at how he was able to kind of just put himself out there and bare his soul and be so brave about it. So I really admire that. I gave this 3 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. Next, I read a graphic novel, and that was The Arrival by Sean Tan. This was part of the Read Harder Challenge. I chose this one specifically because it has 0 words, and my problem when I read a graphic novel is I have to read words. If words are in front of me, I'm going to read them. So if you have a secret document, don't ever flash it at me because I just can't help myself. I am going to read the words. If there are words in front of me that I can understand, I'm going to read them. So I challenged myself with this book since it has 0 words in it to really force myself to look at the art and slow down and appreciate that. And boy, was this a great book to choose for that. The art can just be so expressive in here. I'm not sure exactly how much you can see. I'll just try to pan around. This was an immigration story, and so when the main character first moves to another country, he can't read any of the signs. So it was interesting that that was part of the story when it kind of tied into the reason that I chose this graphic novel in the first place. So that was a pretty nice lineup right there. I did have a problem with the story. The author couldn't seem to tell if this was the story of the main character or if it was, which is the story of immigration, obviously, or if it was a bunch of vignettes of different immigration stories. So because it felt like the author kept trying to go back and forth, I really don't think that either kind of story was told particularly well. So I did end up giving this 3 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. Next, I came up with the idea for my digital TBR jar project. And the book I ended up selecting out of the 3 that it generated for downloaded books was Forbidden by Tabitha Suzuma. And I'm so glad that I picked this up. I originally put this on my TBR because of Book Hunter 155. Not even sure if he still does videos, but back in the day, he really convinced me to read this book. It is just a heartbreaking story about 2 teens who are raising their 3 younger siblings because mom is either drunk or at her boyfriend's house all the time and dad has left the country. Of course, being 17 and 16 years old, this brother and sister still have the same emotional and social needs as other teenagers, but all their time is spent with family. So how can they ever build a relationship with somebody else? And so they end up building a relationship with each other. It's just tragic. It is heartbreaking what happens in this story. At times I was disturbed by what I read, and other times I found it beautiful. And I just found it to be a pretty realistic story. And this one's just going to stick with me for a long time. This is the only book out of the month that I ended up giving 5 stars on Goodreads. Then for my physical pick for my digital TBR jar project, I ended up reading Schroeder by Amity Gage. And this story follows a man who is divorced and has a daughter. And on one of her visitations, he just kind of decides that they're going to go out of town and not tell anybody. And maybe he meant to, maybe he didn't. They end up breaking law. So this story is actually written as a letter after all this has occurred. He's writing the letter to his ex-wife to and it explains all kinds of things. Why did he take the daughter? How did he get where he is right now? How did all this come to be? It tells the story of how they met, how their relationship fell apart, goes into his parents, just all kinds of things. Also, he has done some research on something called pausology. And so there are these footnotes where he talks about pauses when people are speaking or whatever. I just found it kind of fascinating, and I love that it was a tale of a father's love for his daughter. In a sense, it reminded me of Falling Down that starred Michael Douglas. It was a movie where he has good intentions, but in the end, he's going, I'm the bad guy? I'm the bad. So it kind of had that kind of a feel to it. I really loved it. Gave it 4 stars out of 5. Next was the Underhyped Books Readathon. This is my favorite readathon of all. I love talking about underhyped books, so I'll mention the 3 that I read and the rating I gave them, but I have a separate video for that on my channel if you're interested in more in-depth what I thought about them and haven't seen that. First is Lost Bodies by Francois Ganthray, and I ended up giving this story 4 stars. Then The Cottage and Its Lady by Beatrice Bugani, who is a fellow booktuber, Books Overlooks, and I gave her novella 4 stars. Can't believe how young she was when she wrote that beautiful thing. Next, I read Kick by John L. Monk. Very much dark humor and dark situations, but very funny, and gave that 4 stars out of 5. Then I got another advanced reader's copy digitally, a book called Seeker by Aaron Elise Dayton. This is a YA fantasy novel that is starting a series. The cover is amazing. The premise is great. You've got Quinn. She's a teenager. Her family has had her being trained to be a seeker her whole life. She's going to kind of work in a team with her cousin and her boyfriend, and once they take their oaths, they're going to go fight for good in the world in these different situations. But as soon as she takes her oath, she finds out it is nothing that she has been led to believe that it is. It was really dark, but I had major issues with the way this book was told. It's in multiple perspectives, and that led to some pretty boring repetition. Sometimes you'd see the same scene 3 times from 3 different perspectives, and it just felt clumsy and boring. The characters just really, if there were reasons behind what they were doing, I couldn't see it. At times I'd be like, oh, and they go into this big, long explanation why they should do something, and then go, nah, I'm not going to do it. It was just frustrating for me as a reader. The setting couldn't even be determined really well in this. It started out seeming like a traditional fantasy setting where you've got swords and daggers and things of that sort that they're fighting with. And then all of a sudden an air car comes, or airship, and lands, and somebody hops out of it. So that gave it kind of, okay, so maybe this is a futuristic setting. And then the rest of it felt very modern day, where we're using cell phones and looking up things on the internet. And I don't know, it just really bothered me. The action scenes were extremely difficult for me to visualize. I just couldn't see the types of things that were being described. And the twists were just totally implausible. Yeah, I don't want to give a spoiler, but one of them, oh gosh, a character just, oh my gosh. Well, I won't go into it, but I liked some of the weaponry in it. And that's about all I can say that's good. I gave this 2 stars, and that's probably generous. So, yeah, moving on. I wanted to read something next that I knew I would enjoy, and I had read the preview of this book, Say What You Will by Cami McGovern. And this ended up on my list because it's a YA novel, and that's one of the categories in the Read Harder Challenge, which, okay, I'm going to, probably read 80 YA novels this year. So, was very happy to read this one. It's about 2 high school misfits as they transition into adulthood. She has cerebral palsy, and for her senior year, she decides to get peer aides instead of adult aides, and one of them is Matthew, and he has OCD, so they are 2 misfits, but they relate so well and become really good friends. They're struggling to find themselves and to find their own relationship. There are some major twists I did not see coming in this book, some major developments, so that was very nice to see. But I just loved how even when you really adore someone, this really showed how easy it is to accidentally hurt them without really meaning to, and how that can have just such deep consequences. And relationships are hard for everyone, not just people with extra struggles. So really enjoyed that story and gave it 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. So that was my January. Thank you so much for watching. What did you read? And happy reading!